I do have a proposed amendment to the agenda, and I'd like to add an item to number 8, make it 8B as in Bravo, and that would be election for the vice chair. Are there any other changes to the agenda that people recommend? So may I have a motion for approval of the amended agenda?
I move that we accept the agenda as amended.
Support.
So
Second.
we have support, thank you. So motion for approval by the mayor and seconded by Mr. Jobrin. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The first item on the agenda, the special order of business, was something that I requested that we put on the agenda. And I did so in light of the fact that, I'm the third person in 7 months who's sitting in this chair. And considering sort of all of the flux that this board has experienced over the past few months, it's kind of obvious to me that we're working in a period of what I call uncertainty. And when you're in those periods of uncertainty, you kind of look back to sort of what's your foundation, what's your bedrock by which you're going to move forward. And so that's why I asked Harry to provide us with a copy of our group's mission, vision, and objectives. And of course, we call them guiding principles, but I think it's common to any sort of group or organization. And looking back at these, I think these date back to 2022. And I don't believe that this group, at least in the past, since I've been on the board, the past 2 years, has really looked at these or even reviewed them in any way. And I'm actually not suggesting that we actually do that today. We already have a very full agenda. However, there may be an opportunity for us to review these in the future. And I say that because, the city's going through its strategic planning process. Many of us have been involved with that process. I think it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of that process in May. And maybe after that time, maybe a good time to say, look at that output and figure out if we need to make any changes as a board. So I suggest that we wait until that time to do that. But the point that I just wanted to leave with all of you today is that I believe the essence of these words here is why we all serve on this board, right? We volunteer our time because we know we have a great downtown and we want to continue to maintain it and to improve it. And I'm confident with this board composition, even with these uncertain times, that we're going to find the best plan forward. And I really look forward to working with you all and the staff in making that happen.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Right, thanks. Next on the agenda, we always have the opportunity for public comment. We have opportunity at the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting. So any member of the public or the board can speak at that time. Is there any public comment at this point in the meeting? Okay, thank you. We'll move on. The consent calendar. So the purpose of the consent calendar is to expedite business by grouping non-controversial items together to be dealt with one DDA board motion without discussion. Any member of the DDA board, staff, or the public may ask that any item on the consent calendar be removed therefrom and placed elsewhere on the agenda for individual consideration by the DDA board, and such requests will be automatically respected. If an item is not removed from the consent calendar, the action noted in parentheses on the agenda is approved by a single DDA board action adopting the consent calendar. So first on the consent calendar is we have consideration of approving the minutes from the February 21st, 2025 DDA regular board meeting. Approval is recommended. Second item is consideration of approving the February 2025 financial reports and distributions for the DDA General, Old Town TIF, TIF 97, and the Arts Commission. Approval recommended. Does anyone wish to have any of these items removed from the consent calendar? Okay, moving forward, do I have a motion to approve items A and B on our consent calendar?
I'll move to approve this. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkwood. Thank you, Mr. Howell. So, motion is to approve the items on the consent calendar. Motion by Mr. Kirkwood, seconded by Mr. Howell. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next, special order of business. I'll let you tee this up, Harry.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sure you've noticed, if you've walked over the Cass Street Bridge or the Union Street Bridge, there's been tremendous progress on the Fish Pass project. And we've invited Dan Zielinski from the Great Lakes Fishery Commission to come and give an update on the progress of that project and then answer any questions. In terms of kind of the DDA role in this project, it's small, but not inconsequential. So the DDA, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, helped purchase the small parcel that the research center is going to sit on as part of this project. And then we've been in conversations with the Fishery Commission on ways that we can use TIF dollars to enhance some of the improvements that you're going to see today. And those conversations are ongoing, and Dan might allude to those, but very much interested in this project. It's in the heart of our downtown, and it really connects Old Town and downtown. So one reason we wanted to have Dan provide an update on the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
All right, well, thank you for the invite to come talk about Fish Pass. As mentioned, my name is Dan Zielinski. I'm a principal engineer and scientist with the Great Lakes Fishery Commission and project lead on Fish Pass. I've been involved in this project since 2016. And before I get underway in terms of kind of giving an update on where Fish Pass is, I do just want to start and kind of revisit, the impetus for the Fish Pass project, because it's been a number of years since we've presented on the project to this board. So I'll kind of start back at square one a little bit here and move into where we're at with the project right now. So the reason for Fish Pass is really to find a way to solve a problem that we coined the connectivity conundrum. And this is dealing with barriers and fragmented watersheds that are located throughout the Great Lakes and across the world. So having connectivity between a river and its receiving water is critical for the life history of a lot of fish species and just general watershed health. But barriers in the form of dams or road crossings impede that connectivity. And one of the most common approaches to dealing with this fragmentation is just barrier removal. And this is a practice that happened upstream in the Borden-Ottaway River with the removal of the first 3 dams. However, when you have invasive species that are present and those barriers serve a secondary function of blocking those invasive species, resource managers are faced with what I alluded to before, is that connectivity conundrum. What to do with barriers, and how do we manage how do we deal with the alternate management strategies of barrier removal for increased connectivity or barrier retention for invasive species control. And the Great Lakes Fishery Commission has posed a solution as selective connectivity, whereby we can provide passage to those species that are desirable while blocking those that are undesirable. And when we talk about invasive species in the Great Lakes, there's arguably none that have had a more devastating impact on the fishery than the sea lamprey. This is an invasive species that originates in the Atlantic Ocean, but because of man-made connections through the Welland Canal and Erie Canals, they gained access to the Great Lakes at the turn of the century. And once they established, and due to their devastating feeding habits, they contributed to the near collapse of lake trout and lake whitefish populations. In response to that fisheries collapse, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission was formed, and as part of our duties is to coordinate a management strategy for the sea lamprey. Before I get into what those management strategies are, it helps to know a little bit about the life history of sea lamprey. So as an adult, they live out in the lakes and they feed on fish, so they attach with that sucker-like mouth. They'll rasp a hole and they will feed on the fish's blood and bodily fluids. A single sea lamprey is attributed to killing about 40 pounds of fish in its lifetime. But once they stay out in the lake, and they do this for about 18 months, once they are done with that, they cease feeding, and they then migrate into tributaries to be able to spawn. Once the adults spawn, they die, but their larvae will stay in the rivers for about 3 to 4 years, depending on temperature and food availability, where they live as kind of filter feeders. They will then transform. They'll form that disc mouth and rasping tongue, and then they will swim back downstream into the lake to be able to feed and start that whole process over again. So the control strategies that the Great Lakes Fishery Commission coordinates really focuses on the larval stages and those migratory stages. So in the larval stage, we use a chemical lampricide. So it's a nearly species-specific chemical that's applied to tributaries and lentic areas to be able to kill sea lamprey larvae in the rivers. We also rely on barriers to be able to block adults from reaching that habitat where they can spawn. And it has the added feature of then reducing the amount of area that we have to apply those chemical lampricides to be able to kill larvae. And combined, these tools have reduced sea lamprey populations to less than 90% of their historic peak. But it does require constant application of lampricides and maintenance of barriers. However, one of the downsides or unintended consequences of those barriers is that it also blocks a lot of our native species from being able to reach habitat that they also need for completing their life history. So the Great Lakes Fishery Commission is really invested in finding ways that we can maintain control of sea lamprey through barriers while providing passage to native species. And that is really the mission of FishPass. It's to be able to develop tools so that we can provide up and downstream passage of desirable fish while simultaneously blocking and or removing undesirable species. And at FishPass, we will do this by essentially replacing the Union Street Dam with a new improved barrier with selective fish passage capabilities. Once constructed, the site will be transformed essentially into a living laboratory with emphasis on both academic research and community learning. And at that time, we will be able to develop and find whatever solutions that work best for the Boardman Ottaway River fish community. And then once we find that solution, we will transform the site into a permanent selective fishway and begin to export the process in which we found that solution for the Boardman Ottaway to other sites. And just to give you an idea of how broad this issue is, I mean, about 60% of all the world's rivers have at least one large dam. And if we focus even more closely to just the Great Lakes, there's a network of over 250,000 barriers that block migratory fish movement. So even though this is focused on the Boardman Ottaway River and its fish community, it has broad-ranging implications. So FishPass, obviously, besides that, its benefits for invasive species control, fish passage, it has a number of other benefits to the area in terms of improving recreational opportunities at the site, in terms of access north, south, east, west, across the river, down to the river, and also is incorporated into the city master plan, and that was done through a lot of public engagement and will have additional educational programming associated with the project. So although I don't have time to go over every single element that's on this diagram, it just kind of shows you the main features of FishPass. I'll focus on those that are being constructed right now, which are the in-stream structures. So what you see at the bottom of the screen is the fish sorting channel. This construction on that will start probably later this year, but essentially it's a 30-foot wide, 400-foot long flume that was built with adaptability in mind, so we can put in a lot of different tools and move them around as fish become available. And that's one of the main benefits of FishPass, is because we don't have to take fish out of their natural environment, put them in a lab, and study them. We're able to work with fish that are naturally running and behaving in a more realistic sense. The channel can be partitioned in half with a removable wooden partition, and we can also manipulate flows within there through a series of head gates that allow us to maintain a barrier at the upstream end while manipulating flows inside. And then on the other side of the river, we have the Nature Lake Bypass Channel. This is designed to meet all the regulatory flood flows and provide access for recreation and fish habitat. So within that channel, it will resemble a lot of the restored stretches that you see up at like the Brown Bridge Dam or Sabin Dam removals. So it has vegetated banks. It'll have about 1,200 live stakes planted alongside. It has in-stream habitat in a riffle run section as well as an engineered log jam. And controlling flow into that is the Arc Labyrinth Weir, which is a relatively unique structure, but it was selected for this site because it provides a lot of discharge capacity. So we can pass the 200-year flood, which is required for a high-hazard dam regulated by Eagle. But it can also do so safely, so it doesn't generate the kind of dangerous hydraulics you typically associate with low-head dams. And it does so within a very small footprint, which is convenient, considering that it's a very restricted site. And then aside from that, we have a number of other issues in the number of other items on the upland areas, including an educational pavilion, research and education building, as Harry mentioned earlier, a number of water quality best management practices in rain gardens and green roof, as well as pervious pavers. And then we have increased access down to the river through a stone-stepped access, and then ADA compliant boat ramp, kayak launches on both upstream and downstream end, as well as a kayak slide to be able to facilitate portaging across the dam. So when we think about how we actually plan to achieve the sorting process at Fish Pass, there aren't a lot of examples from the natural sciences, so we actually are borrowing inspiration from comparable industries. And the one that I show up here is single stream recycling. So I'm sure some of you have heard this analogy, but it may seem like an odd one still. But if you think about the process of single stream recycling, this is where you're putting all your recyclables into a single container. It gets picked up, it's all mixed up, it's brought to a facility where they begin to sort it out. That's essentially what we want to do with this. The fish are swimming in themselves, so we're not relying on trucks necessarily to bring them in, but the river itself is that conveyor belt. And once there, we want to be able to sort them out. And one of the lessons that are learned from single stream recycling is rather than focused on a material by material sorting process where you're just picking out just paper or just cardboard, just glass, you sort everything based on their attributes. So whether it's size, shape, density, whether it's magnetic or not, its color, and essentially by doing that process where things can go through multiple times, you're able to finally pull out with relatively high accuracy all the desirable material from undesirable material. And in addition to that attribute-driven sorting, there's also the idea of automation. So moving away from manual sorting processes, which is really the only way that selective passage is achievable right now in the fisheries sciences. And obviously manual trapping and sorting is really labor-intensive, it's really stressful for fish, and it's not really a great long-term solution. So when we talk about...
The difference would be, though, here, that some of the recycling gets rejected and sent home.
Yep.
Right, which is like, that we don't do that at our recycling facility.
Can I ask, how deep is the channel that the fish are going through?
So the fish sorting channel will nominally be around about 3 feet deep, normal operation. The bypass channel is variable depth, so you have some pools and some shallow runs.
Okay.
I don't know if this is appropriate because questions are rising as you're talking.
Yep.
I had when people express to me misgivings about Fish Pass, one of the things that they worry about is, oh, well, fish will be able to get through. You know, I mean, I know that there's an impassable barrier at the Coffer Dam there, but on the channel, there's an ability to completely interdict any kind of species and guarantee 100% blockage of undesirable species going up this stream, right?
There's a good video coming up in this.
Yeah, but talking about
Not to
like
be
just the
sarcastic, but
mechanisms,
it's a good
so yeah, that arc labyrinth weir, that is designed to be a permanent barrier. Certainly the Great Lakes Fishermen is really interested in making sure we do not pass any sea lamprey. That is a critical function for any barrier that we maintain. And the design of this actually exceeds a lot of our normal sea lamprey barriers that we construct. They're typically good to maybe about a 15 to 20 year storm. This one is predicted to be able to protect sea lamprey block sea lamprey passage up to the 199-year storm. So just because what we use as a criteria is that it has to maintain an 18-inch differential from the crest of the structure to the tailwater, and it is about maybe a fraction of an inch short of that at the 200-year flood. So it's highly protective against that, and we also have done substantial work in estimating the risk of uncontrolled passage of introduced species like salmon and steelhead, and although it's not up to the 200-year flood level, it's more closer to about a 25-year storm event that we have assurance that it will block their passage as well.
Which is better than the previous
Yes.
situation. So that's a concern that I wanted to be able to address to people that what we're talking about installing here is at a minimum much better than the status quo.
Yes.
And at a maximum, it has all these other ancillary benefits, which I think are great. Now, coming questions that I get from a different direction, which is sort of enthusiasts, a riffle run. Can you define that?
Yep. So it's looking kind of where you have the little circle is highlighted there. It's just a shallower, faster stretch of water, so it's nominally about 12 inches to 18 inches deep through that section. You have a pool that kind of like it would be a natural feature you'd see in an open river stretch.
Is there any ability to affect hydrology further up there for like kayaking enthusiasts
In terms of like
between the dam and that circle there?
whitewater elements, or
In terms of a for example, a standing wave, which is
No.
a huge tourist attraction?
no.
Yeah, okay. Because kayakers will travel to kayak on a standing wave. And also, it's an awesome spot to watch from. Just saying.
Throw a big rock in there, no?
You get what I'm talking about?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I understand that, and I know prior to Fish Pass coming online, there was some consideration of those types of features at this site. Unfortunately, kind of industry-wide, those types of hardened structures are typically really poor habitat for fish in systems that don't typically have those kind of features.
Thank you.
Yep. And to answer your other question about on the fish sorting channel, it's a dual headgate system, so we can control just how much water is going in as well as how deep it is through the channel. So that is something we have controls on, and there's going to be limits on how low the gates can go so we don't unintentionally create a pathway for fish. So ultimately, in its default setting, Fish Pass is an improved barrier over the existing conditions.
Thanks.
All right, so kind of going back to that idea I was talking about with the attribute-driven sorting, how this applies to fish passage, we kind of break down the attributes that we're sorting fish by on these 4 categories. And the first one is phenology. So this is kind of the run timing of fish. We know fish move into rivers at different times due to different stimuluses in whether that be changes in discharge, changes in temperature, changes in time of day, time of year. And by understanding that, we can kind of tune the tools that are going to be available based on the fish that are available when they're available. And the idea of sorting fish based on when they're entering a river is already used in some seasonal barriers. However, sea lamprey, their migratory period tends to overlap quite significantly with a lot of our other native species, so it's not a universal solution. Next, we move on to morphology. This is size, shape, coloration. So this brings up the idea of using like screens and traps to be able to collect fish based on their size. Or the idea of image recognition, which we are actively doing research in, to be able to identify fish using the same technologies that allow you to unlock your phone. And behavior, obviously, is one of the more unique attributes that you don't see in material recycling, because animals, and fish in particular, can respond to their environment. And there's a lot of research on using environmental stimuli to be able to guide fish in certain directions. These are the same types of tools that are being considered for fish guidance at fish safety at hydropower facilities, or like with the silver and bighead carp invasions in the Mississippi River. So this is using things like sound, light, bubbles, naturally occurring pheromones, or cueing specific velocity conditions to be able to guide fish so they can essentially kind of self-sort based on their different responses. And then finally, physiology. In this context, we're referring this to as their ability to overcome a significant challenge, whether that's jumping over a vertical differential or swimming at high speed, or in the case of sea lamprey, their ability to climb like a studded ramp like you see in the bottom right-hand corner. So in this video here, it kind of shows you a hypothetical scenario of how we might kind of integrate a lot of these tools together. So in here, we might start by sorting based on size, then using image recognition tools to trigger opening of a gate or a trap to be able to provide passage or block passage. We can sort fish based on their ability to swim or jump over a barrier, and then use environmental cues to also guide their movement, whether that's with bubbles, sound, light, or partitions to separate fish based on their preferences of where they like to swim in the water column. And then pairing those, obviously, with traps or collection devices to be able to provide that ultimate passage or blockage, in the case of sea lamprey, removal, but in the case of other species that we don't want passed but are not necessarily noxious, just return to the river downstream. So kind of moving forward into the project update, back in May, we were able to lift the contract suspension, and phases 1 and 2, which is all the in-stream infrastructure, so the bypass channel, the Nature Lake channel, the labyrinth weir, and the fish sorting channel, that construction could start with the funding we had in hand, and it gave us time to kind of look for additional funding to kind of fill the gap that we anticipated with the kind of delay that happened with the construction. So back in May, we started construction. We've made it through a lot of the on-site fencing, site removals, relocating water main, installing upstream and downstream cofferdams, which allow the construction to happen in the dry. And we're currently in the process of constructing the Arc Labyrinth Weir, while also partial demolition of the existing dam and fishway. So just kind of, I know, a lot of you have probably walked by the project. Just kind of give you an idea, a sense of what everything is that you're looking at. I'll just kind of show some main features here. And the first one is on the north side of the river. This kind of highlights the property that the DDA was able to help acquire for the project for the future home of our research and education building. This is where the job shacks are. This is where all the contractors have to go in, check in, all the permits are available. There's safety officers on site to make sure that construction is done in a safe manner. And you can also see that there's kind of a pile of rock. Those are essentially emergency conditions if we need to stabilize anything. We don't anticipate the needing to use those, but they are on site and available. On the upstream side, this is where a lot of the work has been going on in the last month or so. And what you see here is basically the base slab for the Arc Labyrinth Weir, and you can start to see some of the reinforcement that's part of the vertical construction. And all this work is done inside that cofferdam, which allows safe and easy construction in dry conditions. And on the downstream side, you can see the partial removal of the downstream portion of the auxiliary spillway of the existing dam and construction of a temporary channel so that once they are done with the Arc Labyrinth Weir, they can actually pass water through that channel while they work on the fish sorting channel on the other side. Once that's done, they'll come back through and do all the final shaping of the final river channel and putting in those in-stream riffle habitats, the log jam, and all the vegetated banks. And in this time-lapse video, it just kind of shows you how the construction process went on. You can see that upstream cofferdam required a relatively large mobile barge so they could get cranes out there putting in all the sheet piling. The sheeting went in relatively smoothly. They didn't really hit anything subsurface that caused any issues or delays. We had active monitoring of settlement and vibration at all the neighboring properties and nearby bridges, and at no time during construction did we exceed any of our thresholds set. And you can kind of see here the white piping there, that is the dewatering system. So they have kind of wells that go down about 20 feet deep and are able to pump water out so they can maintain a dry construction site. And you can see here now they're kind of removing some of the initial layer of the sediment, which is slightly impacted soils, and those were taken off site and disposed of in an appropriate landfill because of just remnant contamination, but nothing that exceeded any safe limits. And you can see here then they installed another line of sheet piling inside. That is a cutoff wall that will be embedded underneath the Arc Labyrinth Weir and provides stability to the dam as well as a cutoff so that you don't have water piping underneath. Mm-hmm. And then you can see all the reinforcement and all the mats that and the initial concrete pours. It's really fast at the end there because they've been making a lot of good progress. And all the red tarps and stuff, that's all just to keep the ground warm so that they can put concrete on non-frozen ground, keep the reinforcement steel warm so it bonds properly to the concrete when it's poured. So progress has been moving quite rapidly over the last coming weeks, and you can kind of see here just a snapshot of what it looked like as of just yesterday afternoon. So again, just kind of to recap, what work has been going on and what we anticipate to occur over the next year or so is phases 1 and 2. That's all the in-stream work. That includes all the initial site civil, all the major excavation, construction of the bypass channel, the fish sorting channel, that relocation of the water main. Although I will note that the water main was initially supposed to be directionally bored underneath the river in our initial contract, but because of the delay and then working with the city and the advantageous timing of the replacement of the Union Street Bridge, the city was able to make accommodations that at a later time they can hang the water main underneath that bridge. So we just had to take out the existing water main and put a stem out to the Union Street Road so that can be eventually connected across the river at a later date. But this also includes the pedestrian bridge that will be placed at the upstream end and all the water control gates that control flow within the fish sorting channel. And right now, we're working on essentially negotiating with the contractor through the Army Corps of Engineers to lift the suspension on the Phase 3 work, which is all our upland features, the park features, the research and education building, and all the final site electrical and communications. To date, Phase 1 and Phase 2, with the increased cost due to the legal challenge, the price tag for that went up to about a little over $23 million. And you can see here where we received all that funding. And I will note that the funding that was provided by the DDA to purchase that property is not included in this. This is just the construction contract. And then for Phase 3, we still have $5.4 million that are in hand by the Army Corps of Engineers to cover those costs of Phase 3 and through additional funding that we received through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, NRTF, through Traverse City, as well as grants through NOAA with our partners in the Grand Traverse Band. We were able to secure an additional $2.9 million to supplement the anticipated increased cost of Phase 3. So we don't have final numbers on Phase 3 because we're going through that negotiation process right now, but we do anticipate that it will be fully funded and that contract suspension will be lifted in the coming months. And a lot of that work is stuff that can happen at the same time that they're doing all the in-stream work.
And just to clarify, because this came up during the city presentation, the USACE funding is in hand. This NOAA funding, though, is allocated.
Yes.
And that is not in question right now with some of the other funding questions. And that was a really important question that we asked, and I wanted to keep kind of repeating that so people don't panic.
Yep. Yeah, and we've diversified some of the other additional grants that we received in the last year that are all state-based funding. So Phase 3, so right now, like I said, we're going through that Phase 3 construction contract modification. That's getting all that work underway. And then in the very near future, we will have a memorandum of agreement that covers Fish Pass operation and maintenance. We'll be coming forward to the main signatories, same as the MOU, which includes the city, the tribe, the DNR, and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. And this outlines the 10-year commitment for 10-year commitment post-construction completion that outlines the responsibilities to operate and maintain Fish Pass facilities. We already have an operation and maintenance plan that's already developed and it has been extensively reviewed. We're just simply awaiting final construction to be able to complete that document. But essentially what the MOA and the operation and maintenance plan delineate is who's responsible for what components of Fish Pass. The first, and we break that down into kind of three main features. The first one are the dam components. Similar to the existing dam, these are operated and maintained by the city of Traverse City. And we have the anticipated cost for those operations. But really, the operations of the new dam are going to be considerably less than the existing dam because there's no gates that have to be operated and exercised. It's a passive spillway, so water will just rise naturally and pour over. So it's really just a lot of monitoring just to make sure that we don't have any erosion, and that's something that the Great Lakes Fishery Commission will assist with in terms of that monitoring and reporting. And then there will be a split cost for maintaining the debris boom on the upstream side so that we don't have logs and stuff getting caught on the spillway. The research components, these are operated and maintained by the Great Lakes Fishery Commission under the direction of our Fish Pass Advisory Board, of which all the signatories in the MOA and MOU are members of, as well as a lot of the research community. And this just includes the fish sorting channel, the headworks, where all of our control gates are, the research and education building, and our tailwater gates as well.
Is this staffed all the time?
Yes. Yeah, we will have, once operational, besides myself, we will have 2 assessment biologists, our public affairs specialist, we will have full-time technician, as well as a semi-annual postdoctoral fellow that will also assist with running all the research programs, and then a fleet of seasonal technicians that will also help maintain the site.
So how many local jobs are we creating?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 permanent positions and quite a number of seasonal ones.
That's great.
That's pretty cool.
Can I ask about
And they're great jobs.
the education component? Is the research center mainly just an office, or is it 8 to 5 p.m., anyone can drop in and learn, and there's somebody there to answer questions?
Yeah, so our public affairs specialist that we just hired, so that's Leah McCallum. She'll be starting on April 1, permanently in that position as a JLFC employee. But the role of that person will be to help coordinate tours and visits and knowledge transfer at the site. The Research and Education Building will primarily be, it houses a lot of the controls for the fish sorting channel, has some fabrication space and is mainly office space, but it also is going to be a hub for where those groups will meet. So on the exterior of the building, we do have, there will be an interactive screen that shows a live cam of fish that are moving in the channel. But we envision a lot of the kind of focal point of where those groups would occur is at the Educational Plaza, which is on the other side, which has amphitheater seating. It's got a map of the lower river as well as cast in place bronze castings of fish that are native to the Boardman Ottaway River are baked into it. So that's kind of the more focal area of where we would have those groups meet.
So it's not necessarily open, it's more passive education and then programmed.
Yep, and it also has public restrooms available too.
I just have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So the weir that's like the salmon weir that we
Yep.
have right now, will that still be used in the fall, or will this be used?
No, the DNR, it's laid out in that MOA that they will continue to operate the salmon weir as historically operated.
I saw your presentation a while ago at the Opera House, so impressive. My understanding is that this is incredibly innovative, right, and transformational worldwide.
Yes.
Who owns the IP to this, like when there's so many parties involved?
Yep, so the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, we are a federally funded entity, both by the US and Canada, and all the research that we fund is open access.
Okay. Okay, and there is no opportunity at some point, this may be a crazy idea, to set up a for-profit company to consult on this to other entities around the world that then help fund the ongoing operations of this?
Well, does it have to be for-profit, I would say? Because I think
Or
that there's some
yeah, just a
cooperative.
nonprofit that helps
Yeah.
fund so that there's an ongoing inflow of money to support the ongoing operations.
Yes, that is,
Yeah.
that is possible, yes.
Okay.
One more thing. So I'm on the Rotary Square Committee as well, and I see that there's restrooms out denoted here as being in that building. I'd like to know to the extent to which those are accessible from the north side, and also what the anticipated opening times are, because it would be a great amenity for our square if we had readily accessible.
Yeah, so what is included in there are it's 2 unisex bathrooms, so just 2 single stall restrooms. They are, I believe, they are heated with the building's HVAC system, so they should be available all year round.
Are they accessible from the outside?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, I think that conversation about the accessibility of those bathrooms is an ongoing conversation. As many of you know, we have restrooms as part of the Hardy Garage that we close in the wintertime because it does attract folks to stay in there longer than we want. So I think that's an ongoing conversation about the accessibility of those. So I don't want to get the cart and the horse in the wrong order here on that one.
I just want to make sure that before the building is built, we have considered that ability so we don't accidentally foreclose that opportunity.
But they could be open for events where they, could be, normally closed during the winter, but then open for specific events.
It's true.
Because I imagine it's like
and
an
then the
overnight-
conversation is then some kind of agreement on how that's maintained for that time period. That's another ongoing conversation, right?
Yeah. So the maintenance is outlined to be the city will maintain the bathrooms, and we will share a contract for janitorial services, but ultimately it's a city contract.
Just wanted to, not a question, because I did see this the other night, and it's really great, but just wanted to point out, as you're moving forward and sharing this with the community, that, so I guess some people in my circle aren't as sophisticated as Pete's, because what really people came to me about, and just to give you some really positive feedback, because I liked it too, is that video you have that illustrates how the fish sorting process works has helped so many people that I talked to that have even been following this project for years and kind of got in concept what it was about, and even saw it on TikTok being discussed by some local news people.
Yep.
So just wanted to say that that's really a great piece. The whole presentation's great, but that's a really great piece that I think has been a missing element for years now as I've been following this project as an elected official, of really showing people what it actually does. So I just wanted to kind of give kudos on that and 2 cents of really lean into sharing that around, because I think it really helps illustrate it for the average people out there that even I was like, kind of like, that's kind of what I pictured it, but it's kind of like a video game. It makes it feel very accessible. So thank you.
So one concern I've heard from people is regards to aesthetics of the gantry. And so I'm wondering, what do you foresee in operation of that gantry being up?
So the gantry it's a permanent fixture, so it's not going to be taken down when not in use. It will be in use to basically help facilitate a lot of our fish retrieval and installation of all the equipment. So it is a necessary element in maintaining a fishway. And like we found examples where there are active fishways that are kind of adjustable, similar to this out in other metropolitan areas, and they have gantry cranes. It's a necessary thing just to be able to operate.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, can you talk a little, we're kind of on this slide looking at phase 3, some of the timing of this, because I think this helps reiterate our conversation about funding priorities for Old Town TIF. You'll see there's 2 boardwalks in this illustration, one in front of River's Edge that connects all the way to Cass. You can't see the full thing. And then there's another additional boardwalk proposed that goes under Union Street to connect to Hannah Park. And so we've had conversations with the Fish Commission about ways that we could supplement the materials of that decking. Right now, the decking, I'm not going to get the term right, but it's almost like a rubberized. And we've been talking for several months about ways that we can enhance the materials that are more consistent with the boardwalk that's along the Boardman Lake Loop, and then also incorporating a rail system. So those conversations are ongoing, but they do have relevance to the money that we either set aside or we allocate towards this project for Old Town TIF. If you go in the Old Town TIF plan, there's actually a wide section of funding that was promised as part of Old Town for this entire project. That's been taken care of, so these kind of small amenities are a great opportunity for us to contribute to the larger project.
Yeah, so the timing of a lot of these phase 3 components are probably going to be not until 2026 at the earliest. So they still have to get a lot of the in-stream work done so they can get the equipment in and out before they can start working on those. All right, and then just to kind of conclude here with your project timeline, this process started a number of years ago. We reached final design in 2020 and had the contract originally bid. At that time, the price tag for the whole thing was $19.3 million. And because of I think everybody's well aware of what the legal delay was. Because of that, we did have increased costs. There's a lot of things that happened over that span of time that impacted construction costs and material costs, but we've been able to get things going, and construction started last year, so we're kind of right in the middle of construction, and we anticipate that all the in-stream work will be done by early 2026, with the entire project completed and operational early 2027, at which point that 10-year research and optimization phase begins. And just kind of give a touch on kind of the audience that Fish Pass has received. In the last several months, we've had numerous requests for tours and presentations and updates on Fish Pass, because now that construction happening, we're kind of shifting from more reactionary to really getting out there and highlighting the benefits that this project has and all the partners that are included with it. We've been able to host and participate in unique events like World Fish Migration Day down at Shedd Aquarium, as well as our premiere of the Ottaway, A River Reconnected, which was a documentary that covers a lot of the dam removals upstream, as well as the shift into Fish Pass. And then this summer, we will have the Great Lakes Fishery Commission annual meeting. We'll be hosting in Traverse City in May. And then we also are participating in an international fish telemetry conference that will be hosted in June in Traverse City, where Fish Pass will be a prominent focus. And then to speak to the jobs associated with Fish Pass, we had 2 recent job searches. We had the public affairs specialist, which we've now hired, as I mentioned, and we also had a fisheries technician position that was also recently hired. In those 2 positions over the last 3 months, we had 95 applicants just for those 2 positions.
Wow.
So there's a lot of interest and people want to participate, and a lot of those were, local and regional people that were very interested in being able to participate in this project. So it's definitely a sign of the kind of attention that the project is getting and the type of people that we can bring into the community. So with that, if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if you haven't already, you can use the QR code to follow along with construction on our live webcam.
Thanks.
Liz, you need to go to the mic.
Liz Petrella, public at large, I guess. So I'm vice chair of Michigan Trout Unlimited. I'm also chair of the local chapter of Adams, chapter of Trout Unlimited. Just so you know, we've been engaged in this with Dan and this team the whole time. We are stewards of this area and the waterways. And just so you know, we've really vetted this from the beginning. Trying to do the right thing and take care of it. We are about conservation first, not about fishing. So we're very thrilled about what they're doing, and that educational component is key. So we're very excited about it. So just wanted to weigh in on that.
Thank you.
Great,
Any further questions?
excellent.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Very exciting project. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So moving on to the agenda item that we added, the nominations and election for the vacant vice chair position. Whoever is elected for this position will serve through September, which would be our next organizational meeting. So I'd like to open up the floor for nominations at this time.
I'd like to nominate Pete Kirkwood.
I'll support that.
Pete, do you accept the nomination?
Do I say a word, or do I just say yes or no?
I think you have to ask for other nominations.
I'll accept the nomination.
So the motion, any other nominations? So the motion on the floor is to, for Pete Kirkwood to fill the seat of vice chair through September. That motion has been made by Ms. Spencer and seconded by the mayor. Any further discussion?
I guess I'll say my thing. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sort of trying to move my life into a space of a little bit less responsibility. But I really feel strongly about the mission of the DDA, and I'm pretty familiar with the document that you brought to our attention at the beginning of this meeting, and I care a lot about that. It gives me a lot of comfort that Ed, you'll be the chair, and also that, frankly, that it's just till September, so it's a little bit of a trial run. So, yeah, I'll do my best. It's certainly not entirely without complicated feelings about taking on that responsibility, but I'm honored and flattered that y'all, are suggesting that I would fill that role. So thank you for the nomination.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you,
Alright.
board.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
staff.
Yeah.
Okay. Next on the agenda, TIF 97 project priority updates.
So we have talked at the last couple meetings about, since our decision in December and January on the priority projects, at least that we're going to pursue for the next 2.5 years, is just to provide a monthly update of where we are with those projects. And I think looking at the slides that were presented just a minute ago, looking at not only a written update, but also a visual update that has milestones and key dates and decision criteria. So we're working on that, but in the meantime, we do have a written update. And so I just want to just touch on a couple of highlights. The Rotary Square process had a very successful month. We did a series of stakeholder meetings. We had a public open house. We had the survey, which was taken by over 480 people. And the results of some of those conversations and the survey are in the packet. And over the next month, we'll be working with our consultant to provide or facilitate a couple of pop-up meetings at public locations, just to try to get conversations where people are at instead of people coming to us. So you see the timeline that's in the memo, again, with the idea that we would have at least some conceptual designs by spring that potentially could then spur physical work at the square, even if it's a small kind of first phase one, perhaps this summer. So you'll see that for Rotary Square, and then the results are also in the packet. I'm going to skip East Front Street for a
So
moment.
one quick question there,
Yeah.
Harry. So our contract with Progressive, does it go through Task 5 here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. The Boardman Ottaway Riverwalk, I'm just going to kind of hopscotch on this memo, but as you remember at our last meeting, we decided to move forward with this next phase of schematic design to kind of get us to a point of a fairly accurate cost estimate. At that point, we would make a decision on whether we want to pursue this project fully. Our attorney and Inform Studio, the contractor, are working to hash out that contract, and I hope to get that project underway here at the beginning of next month, but excited to move that forward. The other projects that we've identified on that list are still in a conversation phase, frankly. The East Front Street streetscaping that we have talked about requires another step of conversation. And so we have to decide whether we want to take that step in conversation. So what was developed a couple years ago was about a 60% design, and we had cost estimates based on that. But to take it to the next phase, we would need to work with a consultant again to kind of get us over the hump on what the final cost would be and have that conversation. That's just to do what we've already talked about. Given the lapse of time between when this project was finished and now, it's probably going to require additional outreach and conversations about what's appropriate for that roadway. I know the biggest reason why this project kind of sat on the shelf was, frankly, discussion on what are the appropriate amenities for bicycles and pedestrians and vehicles. How do we mend that together? So we can certainly pursue this project again, but it's going to require another kind of big step of conversation. And we'll talk about that when we get to the budget piece. The same thing with the Farmers Market Pavilion. Again, we've had a plan for quite some time. Back in 2017, a plan was created. That plan was based on public outreach and also extensive conversations with actual farmers market vendors. So the DDA at that time hired Avenue ISR to do surveys with downtown business owners, public and farmers and other kind of constituents about the need and want and desire for a pavilion. And I'm happy to bring those to our next meeting and just to add that conversation. And then again, extensive conversations with the Farmers Market Advisory Committee and the vendors at the market led to this being a priority project at that time. Essentially, it was paused because we were working on this concept for Rotary Square. Could the farmers market fit at Rotary Square? So essentially, the main reason why this project was paused. I think we've determined that the way that we've traditionally done the farmers market, especially if we do further improvements to Rotary Square, does not fit, and that the location at Lot B would be the permanent location. So we have at least had conversations with Beckett and Rader, who helped design the first iteration of what the new market pavilion would look like, about how do we essentially take the original design, revise it, because when Lot B is paved, they will be actually making it a little bit smaller, so we're losing a couple of parking spaces, and they're also adding some stormwater elements underneath that lot. So the original size of the shed will probably be different, so we need to take the original design and reconfigure it to fit the new geographic space that we're talking about. So you'll see that as the potential costs. Again, this goes to our budget discussion of about $133,000 to get us to the same thing we're doing with the Lower Boardman. Get us to a point that says this is design and this is the cost. Then do we decide, do we want to proceed? So those are initial costs that we're going to want to consider. And you'll see that in the memo. The other items, the State Street two-way project, the City Commission agreed to extend the pilot to December of this year. So it's about an 8-month extension on the pilot. At that time, another discussion will be had about what the next steps are for that is it an extension of the pilot again, or is there a final decision to be made? We have committed to, at least verbally committed, to continue to do the data analysis with Progressive, so to maintain the kind of quarterly data reports that we've been doing. We've also had the cost estimates for some minor modifications to signals and some of the things that we've talked about along that stretch. In addition to, but somewhat separate, we've also had conversations with city engineering about mid-block crosswalks on State Street. So whether the State Street remains two-way or goes back to one-way, I think it's pretty much agreed upon that the mid-block crosswalks help slow down traffic and help pedestrian mobility. So either way direction the street goes, we still want to pursue those. So we're starting to get cost estimations with, again, that's in partnership with city engineering on what those could cost. And those, depending on the location, range between $250,000 to $400,000. They're not cheap. But there's also an opportunity to work with, there's a brownfield plan that's part of the Park Place development that could reimburse one of these mid-block crosswalks. So ideally, you want to just like Front Street, right? There's 2 on the 100 block, 2 on the 200 block, and the 1 on the 300 block. If we were to mirror that on State Street, I think that's the direction we want to go. I don't think we have enough time under the current length of TIF 97 to do 5, but we could do 1 per block. Again, decisions that we'd have to make as part of this overall budgeting, but at least getting some numbers from engineering on how to do that, and that would be then an city engineering project. We wouldn't hire another consultant to do that. That would be a kind of a city. Yeah,
can I just I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yep.
but just because I know we are all trying to make this more robust, open conversations between
Yes.
the two boards.
Yes.
Just to give everybody kind of an overall summary of that conversation, you did a great job of what were kind of like the action parts were, but really the conversation was 2 commissioners seemed hesitant about keeping two-way, but the rest of the commission was very much in favor, but what does that look like? So that's why the year was kind of put on was, if we're going to keep 2 years, let's see what it looks like with some of the paint a little different and maybe some bump outs to get more of an idea of what that would permanently look like. So while there could be an option for another extension of the year, I think the majority of the supermajority, if you will, of the commission was interested just more in looking at over the next 8 months, not year, of, you know, what would that look like going forward and how would that feel for the street, and then what kind of improvements could be made after. And I only say that because I don't want people to think that it's kind of like a kick the can down the road, and at the end of the year, we're going to say, okay, let's do 1 more year extension and da-da-da. I think this is what happens over the next few months, especially during the summer, and some of these other pieces that Harry is talking about are really going to be kind of a deciding key of whether the board decides to keep that as a two-way or not, or kind of get more into that debate. So just wanted to put a finer point on that for you, Harry, sorry.
No, that's great. I think the other thing that was concluded at that meeting with the city commission, that there's no interest at this time in looking at Front Street as a two-way pilot. There could be in the future, but at this point, we just want to focus on State, and that's the direction that we're at least taking forward now.
Mary, was there any discussion about just the Union to Pine conundrum on Front?
Not at that meeting. It's been talked about as part of this larger process, that could be.
I didn't know if it stopped that conversation. But
No, not necessarily. No.
because that's kind of crucial to the success of State Street two-way, solving that.
Yeah.
Questions?
Just going back to your comment, Mayor, is there a clear decision or outcome that people are looking for to be able to make the decision in 8 months? Like, what do people need to be able to say yes or no?
A lot of the conversation was about the feel for pedestrians and bicyclists. And then I think a lot of it was, a lot of the talk was like the paint, really. And by paint, we mean like, okay, we had last summer, granted there was the rerouting of a lot of construction traffic, but, you know, a lot of the frustration was with the straight lane that was also a left turn lane that was also maybe even a right turn lane at some certain parts of the street, and getting a better feel for how State Street might flow if this was more permanent. And so kind of wanting to feel a feel for that, as well as, you know, some of the more pedestrian friendly elements that Harry's talking about here, like bump outs or mid-block crossings, at least, sorry, not bump outs, and some of the other pieces. I think it was acknowledged that obviously exactly what it would look like won't happen in the next 8 months, but getting kind of a better idea of lanes shifting and of maybe some of the improvements that could be made on State Street since it did change from a one-way to a two-way. So I don't think there was a clear, do these things and we'll definitely want to keep it. But I also think that the inclination was a little bit towards, and again, 2 commissioners seemed very much not to want it, but the inclination for the others were, this seems to be kind of working, but we need a much better idea of what it feels like after last summer, so.
Shelley, just to put just an explanation point on that, because that's all right. There has been no magic number set as like miles per hour slowed or vehicle pedestrian incidents reduced. There is no magic number or benchmark what we're looking at. One of the things that when we talk about any kind of street evolution over time is looking at trends. So we have to take a very long view approach to this. What we've seen from the data so far is that vehicle speeds have reduced at least 2 miles per hour. And you might say, well, 2 per hour, that's nothing. It's trending in the right direction. And we know based on kind of 5 mile per hour increments, the severity of incidents of damage to vehicles and or pedestrians increases at that 5 mile per hour increment. So to reduce it by 2 is not a lot, but it's actually quite a bit when it comes to that severity. We've also reduced the incidence of excessive speeding along State Street by half. So it's trending in the right direction. There is no magic number to say, yes, now we'll make it permanent. I think at the end of the day, it's looking at what has it done for State Street. And then there is kind of a level of service examination that we look at when we talk about traffic. Does it still function? Is it still safe for emergency vehicles, that kind of a thing? That will help us make a more informed decision, but it's going to be based on that.
Just to put an exclamation on the exclamation.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on the numbers, but it is this type of difference. If you get hit by a car traveling, you're walking, you get hit by a car traveling 25 miles per hour, you have like a 60 to 70% chance of sustaining severe injuries or death. At 20 miles per hour, you have a 90% chance of not having anything but small injury, and that's a 5 mile increment. So for our downtown setting where we have pedestrians, Front Street, last I knew was 18 miles per hour average, maybe 17.6. That's great. Even if you do have a collision between a car and pedestrian, chances are good of avoiding severe incident. We do not have that on State Street in my lifetime. So that's why I'm a big supporter of this moving forward.
I'm a supporter of bringing closure to it at some point rather than dragging it out, so we can focus on other things at some point.
And I emphasize, do not quote me on those stats. I'm trying to go from memory.
So Harry, I do have a question on East Front Street. So I've heard that the infrastructure underneath the street, whether the water mains, sewer pipes, are like a century old, and that there may be at some point plans by the city to replace those. Do we have any idea of what schedule that may be?
I don't. I mean, we've had conversations with engineering about the opportunity to kind of do 2 projects at once if this was considered. But I don't have a good indication from them on their timing of replacement or the kind of emergency status of those. I just know based on their age, they're due for replacement. And, you know, the more that we can sync the projects, the better. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But a century-old water main could do something like what happened in Detroit. I mean, it can break in the wintertime. We could have, I mean, it seems like it's a good thing to kind of press on. If it's a century-old water.
Well, I think we want to get.
Repairs are not as more costly, and they don't.
I want to give the engineering an opportunity to kind of give us that before we.
I was just concerned if, you know, we're looking at timing here. So I guess my thought is if it's in their radar right now, then obviously it's something that we would want to be able to consider. If it's not on their radar, then, you know, we may want to deprioritize this project.
And also, could we, I mean, the question's been asked, and now we're waiting for legal to tell us, could we reserve some money for a project like that if it didn't meet the timeline for TIF 97's end, but could we say this is an important project, we want to reserve some funds that are spent after TIF 97 ends? When I read it, it seemed to me unless it was specifically dissolved, the TIF, then the money, if it was dissolved, the money would have to go back. But if the TIF just ran out, it seemed like the interpretation I made was that the money would stay. You would be able to use it for the intended purposes that were original under TIF 97. And being able to get that would be really helpful to know, do we have to just spend all $9 million before TIF 97 ends? Or are we allowed to, have a timeline that maybe more follows the city plans and, could be leveraging additional funds from grants and other things? It seems like it's a pretty strategic thing to know if we can use this money after it ends.
So I know we've raised this before, and Scott, if you have any comments now, or if it's something that you maybe want to give us a more formal response at some later time?
It is. We've been looking into that. It's an important question, and there's not a quick, obvious answer out there. So, but we want to make sure that what we give you is full and complete. So we're looking to, between myself and Abby and Ross Hammersley, we've been researching that question, and we'll get back to you likely at your next board meeting.
Thank you. And the one thought I had on the farmer's market shed is this project has been on the shelf for essentially 7 to 8 years. And typically, whether a personal project or if your business, you just don't take a 8-year-old project and start running with it. You go and you look at, what were the variables, what were the considerations that were made for that project at that time? Are those still valid? How's the environment changed, et cetera, et cetera? So I think my personal preference would be that before we consider actually spending any more money on the farmer's market shed, that we would have some sort of, sort of retroactive review, if you want to call it, with the necessary stakeholders, perhaps the farmer's market advisory board, city engineering, whatever, and sort of have them sort of, if you recall, give us a blessing that the project is still valid as it was designed. Any thoughts for that?
I fully support that. I think we need to relook the whole project, yeah.
Well, I'm going to slightly disagree on the whole project, because I think there's the essence of what is there, but, it was brought up, I think, when we were having the general conversations of what we wanted to prioritize and deprioritize, of maybe the design needs to be tweaked or something, or make sure we've got enough feedback from the vendors. But when I hear, after 10 years of sitting here, we need to totally look at the whole thing differently, that takes a slightly different feel for
Yeah.
me, so.
Yeah, and I mean more just kind of exactly as
Yeah.
Ed said, just kind of what's the need again, given the new circumstances, what is the right infrastructure to build and invest in, and kind of just take a step back just to relook it.
Yeah. Step back, I like that.
Any other comments?
I'd like to bring back the stairway.
Oh, no,
West front.
So I
Yeah.
sat on the Farmers Market Advisory Board for 2 years, 3 years, and it was always like that was the top topic was building the shed. I do think that we obviously need to relook at it, and to me, it still is a top priority. But I don't know. I don't want to slow it down. I want to see it move forward and get it done. So.
That's good to hear from the Farmers Market Committee that it's been, generally positive. I mean, I hate to feel like a broken record here, but $130,000 for an open air, shed, it just seems just I just can't even, just as someone that works in contracting and work with designers all the time, just $130,000 for an open air shed design to revise it just seems just unimaginably expensive. There cannot be that many hours to design an open air shed. I mean, how many columns do you have? How many piers do you have? It's just not that complicated. I'm completely insulted as a taxpayer to think that that's what it's cost, $130,000 to design that type of building or to redesign it. It just doesn't cost that much. We can hire a structural engineer, we can put an RFP out to design an open air shed. It's like, I can't.
It just kind of is what it is. It's like
Is it
doing
though?
the
I mean, do
J.
we have to
Smith
bid it?
walkway, and it's $5,000 to, re-landscaping. That's just.
I will put into, I don't work in construction, but I have done been involved in many public projects. One thing this city is renowned for is there's a Traverse City tax on every project because we delay so much. So I'm just putting that out there,
delayed for 6 or
that
7
when
years,
bids
yeah.
come into Traverse City, and I'm not calling out any names for this, they do tend to be a little bit higher than other cities that tend to get things done a little quicker. It is, I'm sorry to say that, but we have an active community. We have boards that turn over. And all that kind of goes into how, there's 5 companies that maybe bid on most of our things, 3 to 5. They just know that they have to consider that because it's staffing for them and it's everything else, so.
Yeah, at this point, I think, we have at least an idea of what the cost would be. I believe, Harry, through discussions, you probably have some ideas of maybe what our next steps would be for a farmer's market. We can always revisit the design cost at a later date. See if there's other places that would want to engage in this work that be more economical, but I think you have sort of, I think, the impetus from us to move forward with the project, and we'll debate the design costs at that time.
I think we're at a point with all these 4 projects that it's going to be sticker shock for all of them. I think that's just where we are with a lot. Once you go do something big, it's going to be costly. I would say, just to put another explanation point on that conversation, is we don't have money in this year's budget to pursue this. So if we were going to pursue this, this would be for the next fiscal year, which would begin in July. So to Ed's point, we could take a short period of time here, get some more feedback from the farmers market folks and vendors about kind of the overall vision that's been discussed for this, and then bring that and tee it up for next fiscal year if we decide to make that decision. So
Maybe we can ask the contractor for a justification on the price too, a little bit more information on that.
We've asked them for their estimate. I'm not going to second guess their estimate. That's what they provide. If we want to go out for another bid,
And
we
again,
can
that's what
certainly do
adds
that.
to the continued increase of costs for Traverse City.
Yeah,
It's over a 30-year period that this has been going on. Sorry, I'm going to go on a soapbox here. That's why Traverse City projects cost more, because all these firms have dealt with Traverse City before, whether it's city engineering or this board or that board, always second guessing. And so that just inflates the cost over and over. It's a cascading effect. I don't know how to stop it other than now I feel like ranting about it. But,
So actually, I would like
delaying a project, but in materials costs, I expect to go up, but the design costs, I don't expect to be this high. And I'd be interested to see, like, an RFP does make sense to me, being the age of this project and we should have someone look at the design costs for this size building, or at least it'd be interesting to go back and find out that if we ask some other design firms, if this was bid out, can we put out some feelers to find out for this size and type of structure, is there another way to get a third party to help us confirm?
if we're not satisfied, we
give
can
us-
vote
yeah.
no, put it out to bid again, start over again, and see where the costs fall. I
I think
guarantee you they're going to be more than
we've got
the
plenty on our
project.
agenda right now. I'd like to give actually Harry the floor, because we have new business, and then we have a lot to talk about the budget. So I think, Harry, you've through just this conversation, you understand the concerns from the board moving forward with the farmer's market shed. So thank you.
The last item that's in that memo is talking about the kind of facilities manager, or the ambassador, for lack of a better word. It's something that we've written a job description for, and I think it's part of this budget discussion is that position funded moving forward. I think it's something we've talked about and advocated for, but that's part of this kind of next budget discussion. But we have a job description. I can tell you, when the snow melts, you're like, man, I wish we had a facilities guy right now, because we could certainly use it. So that'll be part of this next discussion. If you're okay moving on to new business, the Old Town budget adjustment. So this is a project that we've completed in partnership with the city, and we're just catching up on payment, essentially, is all this is. So we partnered with the city as part of their pavement preservation program in 23 and 24 to redo the intersections at 8th and Cass and 8th and Union. The total cost of that, again, just 2 intersections, was $883,445. We've been making payments on that, and we got our last bill, essentially, but we didn't have it in this fiscal year's budget, so we need to make it a budget adjustment of what you see here in the memo of $89,394.43 for this year's fiscal year, just so we can complete our last payment.
And the money's in the budget.
Money's in the budget.
So is there any motion from the floor?
I make a motion that the DDA board approve and amend and add $89,394.43 to the 2024-2025 Old Town TIF budget for intersection improvements on 8th and Cass and 8th and Union.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor made by Mr. McMillan, seconded by Mr. Jobin, that the DDA board approve to amend and add $89,394.43 to the 2024-2025 Old Town TIF budget for intersection improvements on 8th and Cass and 8th and Union. Any further discussion? Okay, call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Great. As you know, once we do a budget amendment, that amendment goes to the city commission for their final approval, and that will coming up. All right, our next memo is a streetscaping reimbursement proposal. And you'll see what's in the packet is the memo, then the proposal from Sox, which is actually the development firm. I confirmed that with them. It's not Sox Construction, it's the LLC that owns the space. And then an old policy, you'll see it's pretty dated here, and if you were to look at that policy word for word, it's probably a little bit different than what we've been doing for probably the last 15 years. So I only say that to call your attention to it, as the policy can be used as a guideline or it can be used as a strict letter of the law, and that's really a discussion for the board to have. In general, the DDA has been funding the streetscaping, and I don't think is looked at this policy in quite some time. So I guess there's a lot of options we could take. We could take some time and actually rewrite the policy to make it kind of more fit in with 2025, where we're at and what we've been doing. Or we could approve this as is or as amended. There's a lot of different directions to go. I would say whether we approve it or not approve it, it's probably best practice to refine this policy this year. So, but this is not going to be the only request that we have moving forward. So at a minimum, we should probably address the policy. It's more of a matter of how you want to move forward today with the request that's been submitted.
Can I ask, Harry, as the DDA director, having reviewed this, do you see that there needs to be changes to it?
Well, I think if you read it again to the letter of the law, it talks about like anyone proposing this would do the entire block. We haven't done an entire block in quite some time. So there's been some differences in the way the policy was originally written. And to be honest with you, this is the only policy that I have. Like there might be an update to this, but I just don't have readily accessible. So that's why I'm using this as the kind of launching pad for this discussion.
Harry, is the question presented right now whether or not we reimburse the management fee portion of the claim?
That's one of the questions in the memo, correct, yes.
But are you also asking whether we reimburse at all?
Well, it's been tradition that we have. I want to get this board's approval before we spend those funds. So there's really kind of two questions. One is, do we want to reimburse? If we want to reimburse, do we include the admin fee? Or do we not want, we want to pause, redo the policy, and then bring this back after the new policy is approved?
And our attorney is sitting there, so I'm assuming this has kind of been vetted, but I know sometimes when we've had things that have been applied to for the city commission, from liquor licenses to other kind of things that fall under policies that currently exist, we've kind of hesitated to kick the can on something that was applied for under the current policy to create a new policy and then bring it back out of kind of procedural and an acknowledgement of some people are acting within the rules that we currently have and applying under the rules that we currently have, and then making them wait until we potentially change the rules might not always be the best idea. Is that any concern here, or are we kind of okay with that from our legal standpoint of it's okay to kind of put this on pause and re-examine the policy completely?
I think I'm okay with you putting this on pause and
Okay.
re-examining the policy completely. As Harry said, I think that's one of your options, and I don't think there's any detriment to that, so long as this board follows up, with some level of haste, so that the stocks can understand what they're going to get reimbursed for or not.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? So one thought that I have is, the board usually sets policy and the staff executes. And given that we have a policy now that I haven't seen before that's 10 years old, and at least it seems to me that there may have been some instances in the past 10 years, where the policy hasn't been followed, I personally would like for us to just, either reaffirm the policy or make changes as we believe, are in effect today. So actually, my preference would be that we would actually table the motion for the reimbursement of funds, ask our staff to address the policy and bring it back for our approval. At that time, then consider the streetscape reimbursement request.
Well, it's clear that we have a policy of wanting to reimburse developers for doing this sort of thing. This developer's come in good faith with the expectation that that's going to happen. My sort of inclination would be to honor that and really, for now, address just the question of whether the management fee is covered, because clearly the rest of it is sort of contemplated under the spirit of the policy as it exists right now. I also think we should take this as a spur to kind of revisit the policy and clarify, so that when questions like this come up in the future, we're prepared for that. But to me, if the developer's standing here saying, well, I want to do what you've said that you want me to do, it feels a little bit uncool to kind of just say, hold on, we're going to go just we're going to go and think it over again. That's my 2 cents.
Is that a motion?
I agree with Pete.
Exactly. So I think, I don't know if this is possible to bifurcate, but I would say I think we should approve the reimbursement, withholding maybe the management fee pending a review of the policy, if that feels like a nice way to split the baby.
I would support a motion like that if you threw a date on it, so that we don't have endless policy review.
And whose job is it to review the policy?
It's up to, on your discretion, it's up to us to essentially bring a new policy for you all to approve.
Within 6 months?
Within a month, but there's
Within
no
a month,
reason why
great.
this is
Okay,
not
so
that
here's
extensive.
my
We can bring
motion.
this back in April.
I make the motion that we reimburse, consistent with the existing policy, reimburse this request up, but not including the management fee, pending a kind of a review of city policy within the next month, whereupon we'll make a decision whether or not that management fee portion is reimbursed.
Is that clear enough? Second.
This is where I love that we have Benjamin at the city commission meetings, because he makes that all sound so smooth.
What are you trying to say? It's not smooth? Come on.
So,
I will second that.
Yes.
Condition of approval of content, whatever, by admin and
Our
attorney.
Exactly.
Whatever that phrase is at the end. there.
Second in spirit.
How about we try to reiterate this?
Yes,
Ed,
let me
I see you taking notes. Do you mind? You
well,
take a stab at
I'm
it?
trying here. So
All right.
the motion is that we reimburse this streetscaping reimbursement. We reimburse the streetscaping request, not to include the management fee, pending review, which will be pending our review of our policy within the next month, which will be reviewed by the board and our council.
At which
Whereupon
time-
we will revisit the question of whether or not the management fee is reimbursed.
That's it.
That clear.
Do you have a clear motion?
Let's do it one more time, Ed. Do you
Well,
mind?
can I-
Sorry.
Can I make a suggestion? Because the one thing in the motion here is the DDA approved funding of $100,224, or sorry, DDA approved funding of $50,112 from TIF 97 towards streetscape improvements at 232 East State Street, and further instruct staff to revisit our policy within the next month and bring back a recommendation as to whether the management costs should be included at that time. Sorry.
Yes.
I agree with that amended motion.
Great job, Pete.
Also,
Yes, okay, great.
I don't know if I can repeat that.
So basically, I took
I understand
the motion and
I
I
understand
added
the
the
notion. I
caveat
understand
to
the
it.
notion, yes.
Yeah.
So the motion, is that a friendly amendment to the motion?
yeah, I'm
Different
game with it. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that,
So go into the original motion.
right, the motion is that the DDA board approve funding of $50,112
From TIF 97.
Excuse me,
From TIF 97.
from TIF 97 towards streetscape improvements at 232 East State Street.
And that the board instructs staff
The board,
to review policy, great, now I have to remember what I said, and bring back at the April meeting for possible reimbursement of management costs as well. Or at that time, we could say. I'll let dealer's choice on that wording. Pete made a really great motion there.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so I'll repeat the motion, that the DDA board approve funding of $50,112 from TIF 97 toward streetscape improvements at 232 East State Street, and the board instructs staff to review the existing policy and bring back that policy to the April meeting, where the board will consider reimbursement of the management fee.
Perfect.
That's the one.
There we go.
Okay, so we have that motion on the floor, made by Mr. Kirkwood, seconded by Mr. Howell. Any further discussion?
No, please no.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, well written, everyone. So the next item on the agenda is the budget. And, talking with the chair, I think we really wanted to take perhaps a different approach to how we discuss this budget. I think in the past, it was, here's the budget, what do you think? And I think we're hoping for a little bit more dialogue on the projects that we want to fund and where those priorities lay. And then I also want to take a minute to talk about kind of how, or the framework of how these decisions are made. So on the beginning of your packet on page 60, you see the budget timeline. So that is the drum that we need to march to. So those dates don't really change. So we need to make sure that we keep on schedule. We just unfortunately had a bite of the flu bug the last couple of weeks, so we were not able to have enough for the finance committee to meet, which is why we're starting this conversation here with the full board. But that's essentially the schedule. You'll see that, again, the city commission, for those of you who don't remember, actually approves our budget before we do, because they ultimately make that decision, and that's reflected in the process. We have, again, 3 different funding buckets that we use. We have a DDA general fund, the TIF 97 fund, and the Old Town fund. And there's a little bit of background in terms of what the taxable value is expected to be, and then that revenue for both the TIF 97 fund and the Old Town fund. The other thing, again, going to how do we make informed decisions about where we want to invest these dollars. What do we look at? We look at the CIP, which is something that we've been working on. We always look at what are those continuing expenses and services that we've basically said we're not going to not fund. Some of them are obligations, like the payment on the Hardy parking garage. That's a bond payment. We have to make that. Others are just things that we've done, almost ever since TIF was established. Ed mentioned at the beginning at the meeting our downtown guiding principles. That was done as part of the Moving Downtown Forward plan. And so what we decide to move forward on should match those. Ed also mentioned that the city is going through a strategic action plan, which has, at least to date, identified some topics and themes that they're working on. And I think it's imperative that the projects we fund, work to match those as well. Then we have our existing documents, kind of our guideposts. We have the TIF 97 plan, we have the Old Town TIF plan, but we also have the City Master Plan, the Lower Boardman Unified Plan, the Mobility Action Plan. Those are things that kind of guide our decisions as well. And then obviously the work that we've done over the last several months to identify our key priority projects. The other thing I wanted to put in there, I think it helps frame, again, what the DDA does and what the DDA doesn't do, is on page 64 with the blue chart and the pink chart, is just, again, talk about what the DDA does in terms of the critical infrastructure and the services and then what the city does. And a lot of those times, those get melded together to make one project, but it just helps to articulate, again, what's our role and our responsibility, and then how do we partner with the city to do these projects. The last thing we tried to do as part of this conversation is to help identify the projects under kind of 4 large themes. So what does it take to run downtown, both from kind of a day-to-day perspective, but also running the office? What does it take to fund our essential public infrastructure, things that just work to the day-to-day safety and care of downtown? What do we want to fund that is transformational? The primary projects we've been talking about are things that kind of change the entire character of downtown. And then what is the promotional activities that we want to work on as part of being a downtown?
Harry, is this just your conceptual
Yeah,
framework?
this is just,
I
yeah.
think it's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And the promotion is kind of has a wide lens, right? So promotion is making sure we have a current website. Promotion is making sure that people are aware of the activities that are going downtown. It's also things like the light parade and all the things and events that go into having a successful downtown. It's all kind of wrapped up into that bucket. So you'll see we organized some projects with essentially dollar signs and blanks, but on page 68 of your packet is the beginning of a spreadsheet just to talk about how we might want to fill that in. And I'm not sitting here saying we're going to fill each one of these slots in, but I want to talk about priorities and where these projects came from. So on page 68, you'll see 2 columns. The pink column is TIF 97. Again, the estimated revenue is about $4.3 million. Again, we get those numbers from the city. I have put in here these fixed costs, things that we've traditionally funded or agreed to fund. And so we have legal services. We have the service agreement with the city, and that's something that we started last year, and that includes essentially the maintenance that the city does for us downtown. We're paying our share of that. Then we have trash removal. I got confirmation from the city attorney that the trash removal is actually part of the service agreement. So that $60,078 for trash removal is actually in the service agreement number. So these numbers are we need to be tweaked a little bit, but just so you know that trash is included in the service agreement. Then we have the bond payment for the Hardy parking deck. We have Officer Culver, our downtown police officer. We have the farmer's market. Currently, we still are paying on the retail incubator. Those are kind of fixed costs we know are going to go into the next year at those levels. Then we have kind of these agreed to costs. So last month, again, we decided to move forward with the Riverwalk. The total of that was not to exceed $419. If we get this contract moving, we can start working on that before this fiscal year ends, but that's the estimate of how much the next fiscal year would cost for that portion. We've talked about the 2-way pilot, that $100,000, again, would cover the work with Progressive to continue the monitoring and the data collection, and then any small modifications that we want to make. It does not include the mid-block crosswalks. So then we get down to further down the page, and then we have those buckets, the running downtown, the essential public infrastructure, the transformational public infrastructure, and promotion. And there shouldn't be anything on that list that's like, out of left field. The DDA has an admin fee that we collect from both TIFs, and that helps run the DDA. Used to be 2 admin fees, one for the DDA and one for the city. Once we created the service agreement, there's only 1 admin fee for the city. We've done composting. That program's still up and running. We have the general infrastructure repair, which is kind of fixing the cracked sidewalks and the broken signs and that type of stuff. We have this item called Clean and Green, which incorporates a lot of things like improving the wayfinding signs. So every spring, you should see our hallway, we have 3 wayfinding signs that have been knocked down and waiting to get put back up. So every spring, we do a whole new wayfinding thing, and we have actually the maps on the kiosks that we're talking about redoing. The planters, our contract with YouthWorks to do the day-to-day maintenance, the holiday lights, and then we actually rent a truck from the city to help do all this stuff. There's more to that, but that's kind of the bucket of Clean and Green. What's new on here is this EV stations. So as you know, the parking services used to be under the umbrella of the DDA. They're no longer under the umbrella. However, they are still downtown infrastructure if you kind of think of it in a holistic approach. Some of those EV stations within the Old Town deck and the Hardy deck are reached beyond their maturity, and in conversations with Nicole, opportunities to upgrade those EV stations and those parking decks kind of to a newer technology. And some of that might require additional infrastructure at the deck. I'm not an electrician, but my understanding is you have to actually change potentially the electricity in the deck to actually accommodate a newer charger station. It's just ampage and that kind of stuff.
Can I ask a question as you go, or do you want us to hold them?
I'm sorry?
Do you want us to hold questions, or can I ask as we
Go
go
ahead.
through? So on the EV stations, just looking at the tea leaves as best as any of us can, you know, are there still opportunities, have you talked to Nicole, or even like through TCLP, are there still some opportunities to find some funding to help update those? I know for a while that was kind of available here and there of some offsetting costs. I just think that if there is, if we could definitely make that a priority this year then, because that kind of funding might be drying up.
Here's what I would suggest. That's a conversation with parking. I think what we have an opportunity to have a discussion on is not us funding half of the complete replacement. Do we want to fund replacement or one or two of these at either deck? I think that's, so it's not a monumental investment, but it's in a small investment.
Yes, and sorry, I'm wearing both hats right
Yeah.
now, so having that conversation in the bigger picture is what little bit the DDA and TIF or whatever funding could contribute, plus having that conversation
Yeah.
with the city of maybe taking advantage of any incentives that might still be around,
Yeah.
that might go away. I see from our perspective how that would be one or two at a time,
Yeah.
but maybe it makes sense as that bigger conversation with parking being under the city now of striking while the iron's hot, as it were.
Yeah.
So just putting that 2
Yeah.
cents out there.
So my conversation with Nicole, they mean, depending on the brand that you get, we're looking at about $20,000 for one new station, so they're not cheap. We have the director of facilities, which I mentioned, which, and more conversations that we're having about which bucket that falls under. Is that a DDA staff member or is that a contractor? I think we have greater flexibility if it's actually a DDA staff member instead of a contractor, but we're still exploring that. One program that it still has is still in effect, but I think has opportunity to grow is this Destination Downtown. That's a partnership with Beta to essentially pay for people to ride the bus to work downtown. It was a program that was created pre-pandemic when our parking lots were busting at the gills to get more people to use public transportation. So it's a small stipend to an employee of a downtown business, essentially pay for their fare to get to work back and forth. The numbers that we have right now are, I mean, it's less than a dozen people, so it's not a huge investment. So I'm not suggesting this is a large investment, but a investment maybe down the road to support that. We have a public restroom program. Many of you have been on the board. Jeff, you might remember from years ago, we had looked at public restrooms for quite some time, and then we kind of pivoted to contracts with local businesses as a stipend to have their restroom be a public restroom. I think that's a program we want to continue. And so you see that under the running downtown bucket. And then essential public infrastructure, the streetscape and snow melt, we just had that discussion. We're going to get more applications for that. The stormwater infrastructure one is a little bit complicated, only because we just don't have a turnkey project ready to go. It's something that we try to bake into all our projects, so something like the Lord Boardman would have stormwater built into it, but that's another opportunity to partner with the city on a joint project like that. There was a study also done a couple years ago that talked about some of the infrastructure stormwater gaps within the city, and I'm still working with the city to get copy of that to see if there's any holes in the downtown area we could fill. Bridge repair. I don't know if I think it went out yesterday, but there's a public service announcement talking about load restrictions on the North Union Street Bridge. Essentially, it's going to take a really big semi to not go over that, but it's still safe for everyone to drive and walk on it, but it's going to need some repair. We've already been approached by the city to contribute to the cost of that. And so that's something we want to consider. Do we want to contribute to that? Do we want to contribute some to that? But that's kind of infrastructure that is ready to go this next fiscal year is going to need to be repaired. Associated with that bridge is the deck that's on the northwest side of the North Union Street Bridge next to the building. There's a small little staircase into this deck that we had done with the city quite some time ago, and we were trying to decide what is the decking and what is the railing look like, and we never did, and so we put up kind of this chicken wire fence, and it's been like that ever since. Now that we have some conceptuals as part of the Fish Pass and working with our friends from Inform on Lower Boardman, I think we could actually finally put in the correct decking material and the railing on that small little section. I don't have a cost for you at this point, but it's not the staircase, Gary, that you're talking about, but it is stairs in a different way. That would be a project that I know that we've kind of, quote unquote, promised that for quite some time, but we've just not done it. Then we get in our transformational public infrastructure. So Rotary Square, we're obviously invested in that. Again, those funds are being spent from the Rotary grant at this time. We've not spent TIF dollars on the actual conceptual design of that. East Front Street, we just talked about, Farmers Market Pavilion. If we're going to make a decision, this is the year to do it because the Lot B reconstruction is planned for this next fiscal year. So we can, again, allocate dollars for that. I do have the mid-block crosswalks that we mentioned. And then the other one, which is on a smaller scale, is a Riverwalk signage. So one of the things when we talk about this Riverwalk, there's not one sign anywhere in downtown that says this is where the Riverwalk is or a gateway or anything. So a small investment in just signage just to get people aware that there's a Riverwalk in downtown, I think not only in TIF 97 but Old Town TIF would be a good investment. So that's transformational. And then promotional, I kind of these buckets again, it's communications, it's marketing, and it's events. And an event is also marketing. They're kind of one and the same. And then again, we've been having conversations with Traverse Connect about our collaboration moving forward on that. So that's TIF 97. Old Town TIF has many of the similar elements, but has kind of a different essential public infrastructure, and we talked about that at the last meeting, and different transformational public infrastructure. So I kind of want to that's kind of hopefully setting the table for some discussion on, are there things in here that you're like, yeah, we still want to do, but maybe not at the scope and size that we used to do it? Are there things in here that just are non-starters anymore? And it's to kind of have this fluid conversation so that we could tee up an actual budget that we would bring with dollars behind it at our next meeting.
Just a question about the East Front Trade project.
Yeah.
So did it seem like, was there anything remaining in that original contract, or the contract that we had that we were working under for the East Front Street kind of process? Because it seemed as a participant in that process that it kind of stopped abruptly, that there might have been an intent, because basically those three options came out.
Yeah.
And the idea was to get feedback and then have a public meeting to review those findings. And as I remember, we kind of just stopped when those three things came out. I think there were some kind of discussions among stakeholders, but not the whole stakeholder group as it was. Because as someone that was participating, it was all of a sudden like there was no conversation about that.
Yeah. So if you go back to that project, essentially the team came up with kind of three options, an A,
Right.
B, and C, right? And C was like a hybrid of A and B. And the momentum was leaning towards option A, which was a shared street. And I think that's where the conversation essentially stopped was, is it a paved street, or is it shared street, or is it a bike lane, or is it a cycle track? It was that kind of conversation. That's when the project stopped, and that then sparked, because of the implications of how that works as it goes up to Park Street, that sparked the two-way conversation. So the project kind of pivoted towards the two-way. So
Because I felt as a public participant that it was like, whoa, I never got to really participate in that. Like what you're saying, the momentum was towards this one, but as a public participant, I felt like I didn't get to contribute to understanding that momentum. It seemed like those were not public discussions. Maybe there was like,
absolutely they were. I mean, we had, I don't have a voting system, but that's essentially after the last round of public engagement, that was where we were leaning, was the option of the shared street. And that's where, again, the conversation got muddied.
It pivoted the 2-8 as well as
Yeah.
the, I don't know what it's called now. The
Action mobility plan.
the non-motorized plan or alternate transportation plan. So both of those came out of the East Front. Like, we can't move forward without a broader concept or a broader plan, I should say.
Yeah, and I do believe that was brought up at some city commission meetings. Like, as far as public discussion, I think some of that direction was done at a study session or something like that as well. So it wasn't just behind the scenes of staff making that decision. There was some kind of public conversation of like, we feel like to do this, we needed these two elements. It wasn't exhaustively done because it didn't take a lot of action on that particular item, but the other items that came off of it, like Gary is saying.
But to
yeah.
Mike's point, it was
Yeah.
a little abrupt because
It
it just
was,
went,
yeah.
from-
It was.
because it was handled at the city commission level and they kind of took over the
Yeah.
direction of the project.
Yeah,
Yeah, because as a building owner, when I saw this came out, I came back with some questions, like, hey, I have some concerns about this, but then they were never really addressed. We're like, well, we're just putting this on hold. And it's
Right.
like, shh, you okay?
Yeah.
And my concern is are we starting up and are we like, it seems like the public engagement part of that is going to be important to determine, are we going with that and what does that look like? Because it has some real implications for all the buildings and business owners along that.
I think, Mike, to your point in the larger conversation of what can we do in the time we have left, as much as I would love to see East Front Street happen, because I think, again, it's the last street to see any investment in downtown. My concern is that we spend a year on this as a bike lane, no bike lane conversation, and we get nowhere. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's just a caution if we try to address this project. Yeah.
Todd, you had a question?
Oh, yeah, I have 2 questions here. I'm sorry. Caught me off guard there. I know I've met him because he's walked in and introduced himself, and I know he is to the neighborhood. It was pointed out to me before the meeting. Does the police officer also patrol Old Town?
He does. So
Okay.
he absolutely does. It's just it's funded under TIF 97 because essentially the dollars to
size.
spread right. Exactly.
Right,
Yes. But
okay.
he absolutely does. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you too is can I show this to some of the other property owners in Old Town and see how they feel about it as we go through?
These are
put
public
together?
documents. You
Okay.
can show it to anybody you want.
Right.
Yep.
I think it'd be interesting just to talk to a couple of merchants and see what their priorities are. Okay, thank you.
Ed?
To Todd's point, is there a specific reason why Old Town isn't sharing in the cost of the community police officer? And,
TIF 97 is 5 times the size of Old Town, so I mean,
but historically, we have,
divided
historically, we have shared expenses like
Right,
for
I don't
marketing
have
and
a-
everything. So that's why I'm just, the question of why,
I think
but
that
it makes a $15,000 difference? Do you know what I mean?
I don't know. When they set it up, that's how they set it up.
Right,
So
right.
you could have a $3,000 contribution from Old Town or whatever you want
Right.
to slice it. But yeah.
okay. Question, Shelley?
Yeah, just more of a comment. Harry, I love the way you've laid this out. I think it's really clear. 2, going back to Ed, your earlier comment, I just want to make sure we align it to the city's priorities and the strategic plan, so we bring this forth again, because I think that's incredibly important. And 3, I do think even though we say, this isn't a big investment, it's a little bit, every dollar counts. And I feel really strongly about that. I feel like we need to focus on the things that are going to have the greatest impact for our residents, and not just throw a couple grand here. A couple grand's a couple grand. A dollar's a dollar. So I just want to make sure we focus, because it all takes resources, and every dollar counts right now, and it's important.
Yeah, I didn't mean to minimize the investment. I think what we've learned over the last year, essentially this is, I've been at the helm here about a year. There's certain things that we invested on where we just haven't spent as much as we allocated for. We had $30,000 for a downtown composting program. We're not spending that $30,000. So there's ways that, when I say smaller investment, I mean like
Yeah,
not
and-
tradition and how we,
But it's
work
kind of
that.
like EV, right? Like, is that a priority for the city? Where does that fit in the strategic plan? Who should focus on that, Should we be spending time there, or somebody else? I just want to make sure we're focusing.
I think can we get it done is also a big thing, and I think that's for me the biggest indictment of the biggest kind of drawback to the East Front Street thing is it's just we're too far from having actionable direction on it for it to be something that I'm prepared. For me to feel like it's a priority that we need to do right here in the twilight of TIF 97, So.
And that's where 2 cents, and I know we've kind of talked about this, but just to throw it back out there. East Front Street, I agree with Harry completely. It's the kind of last piece that we haven't really taken care of. That said, I also know that city and engineering have their own priorities and budgeting, and if those aren't going to align for whatever reasons, this is kind of the crux of the conversation of TIF, right? We have 3 years of TIF left, potentially, and why would we go in and do a bunch of work on East Front Street if it's going to get torn up again in a couple of years? And I know that things get put back into place, but we have talked about this in the context of the conversation. I think this is really important, that the city, when it does a job, it's usually pretty basic, and maybe there's a little bit of like a bump out or something. But if we want nicer landscaping, wider sidewalks, cycle track, whatever else those conversations might get into, it's really going to take TIF dollars, or it's going to be a huge chunk of the general fund for that year. And I think that's going to be a discussion a little bit when talking about aligning with the city's priorities. I think that's going to be on the city commission also to decide, and the city as a whole. If that's not a budget priority to do that work, to me, that's saying East Front Street will get done when the city gets to it, and it's not going to be what I think most people want when they advocate for a walk-bike community, because that's not going to be in the budget, or at least not to the degree that it could be if there was this partnership with this additional funding. And so I think I agree with this. Where do we have the impacting? I pull back though a little bit on what can we get done completely. I still will advocate that I think whatever we can do, and it's already kind of in here, but just this and future budgeting, of doing what we can on the board in Ottaway, because we have ignored that as a community for our entire existence. We've made it worse. We've improved it slightly. We have not done good things with it. We have not really honored our really obligation as stewards. And I know we'll never get it done, even whether TIF expires in 3 years or it gets renewed for a period of time, that it's going to be a massive project. But I think that somebody has to have the vision and be bold enough to start it. And I think this is an opportunity for us to do it. And then it sits on the city's shoulders if we don't extend TIF of how they're going to do it. But at least somebody's getting the ball rolling, because we've had generations of city commissioners who, and I myself included, I've been elected for 10 years, so I'm putting myself in this. Generations of city leaders who have not done it. We have the will here. We've done a lot of the legwork as the DDA. And I think that to leave that behind would be negligent on our part.
I apologize, I have to leave.
Just a little bit more context on the East Front Street. So if we recall, when the project essentially shifted to the two-way, we did work with the city to repave East Front Street. So we did do improvements on the street, but to your point, none of those were for pedestrians. It was just strictly the street itself.
So I'm trying to maybe wrap up the discussion here. So what would you like from us, and what is your sort of, what timelines do we need to work with?
This is helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to get some feedback on, are there certain priorities that we need to put higher on the list versus lower on the list, and then based on that, which I'm getting, come back essentially at the next, go back to that list. There's a finance committee for the first week of April, refine that for that conversation, and then bring this back for the April board meeting. The other thing I just want to point out, as you see at the bottom of each of these columns, is the estimated beginning fund balance. So when we think about what we have to work with, yeah, that's the tax capture revenue at the top, but don't forget the number at the bottom. So there is a kind of a piggy bank that we have. And then I think based on some of the things that we've been looking at for this last fiscal year, I think we're going to have more in that fund balance than we may be anticipated moving forward. So just keep that in your mind as well. So.
Great. Love it.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, let's move on to the executive director report.
I don't think anything in here that you're probably not already aware of. I think again, the two-way pilot was extended for December. There's discussions about an ad hoc committee of the city commissioners to kind of talk about that. That will not be discussed at Monday's meeting, but at some point it'll probably come back. What is on Monday's night agenda is the formal consideration and potential amendment to the ordinance to reduce the number of board members on this board. I don't anticipate that's going to be any different.
It's on
than that.
consent right
It's on
now,
consent.
so,
Okay,
yeah.
there you go. And then the city is still working on that TIF implementation policy, and that's kind of a work in progress. So those are the kind of the big items for that report.
Thanks. Arts Commission, either Lauren or Todd.
I'm gonna refer you to Laura, and I want to apologize to the board. Aside from brain surgery, it seems like this meeting always happens at the worst opportunity for me. It's right in the middle of my week, and there's always been something up. I'm kept abreast from other merchants, but Lauren's really gotten the reins on this one. This is a wonderful experience that's transpiring this fall. So I will do my best to get to these meetings. Like I said, they're at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, and it's right in the middle of the week. Thank you, Lauren.
Of course. Okay, so just a couple updates from the Arts Commission. So last month we talked about the inaugural mural festival. They met on February 19th to review the over 100 artist applications that we received for the mural festival, and they selected 13 finalists. The Arts Commission will meet on Wednesday, this upcoming Wednesday, March 19th, to review the to review the finalist concept art and then select up to 7 artists to participate in the festival. The deadline for those artists to submit their concept art is actually today, so we should have that packet out to the commissioners and the public relatively soon. We've continued to meet with the NOBO businesses about participating in the festival, and then the participating businesses will be determined after they select the artists. Also at the February 19th meeting, the Arts Commission approved a $2,500 grant through the Commission's Paying It Forward grant program for the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network. At the Northwest Michigan Arts and Culture Network's summit, which will take place in May downtown, the network is creating a community mural. And so that was what that grant will support. It is contingent upon the network finding a location downtown, so they are currently hunting for a good site for the community mural. And then lastly, at the meeting on Wednesday, the Arts Commission will discuss the FY 25-26 budget. Since it is a city agency, the Arts Commission's budget is included in the city's budget, and they adhere to the city's fiscal calendar.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Questions?
It's really exciting. And
Yeah.
Steve Nance must be part of this because I've got like 2 or 3 messages on my dry erase board from him. So he's still, so he's still out there too. He's going around. There you go. The mural should be on the back of your building.
Let's do it.
There you
Let's
go.
do it. There, just found it. Answer that question. Nope. Thank you.
Exciting. Thanks, Lauren. Sarah?
It's 11 o'clock, so I'm going to speed race as quickly as I can. I won't get into all the details in terms of data, but a recap of Traverse City Restaurant Week. Hopefully you were able to attend. We had 54 restaurants. That's a 17% increase year over year. That's with our newly established boundaries that did eliminate some restaurants from the list, so a good number. We received a great response in the media. Traverse City Tourism was a great partner for that as well. They provided the digital passport. We had a 62% increase in signups year over year for the passport. 1,300 names were added to our database of those who opted in from the passport, so 31% increase there. So great numbers all around. We have some survey results coming in that's open for guests and participating restaurants through the end of the month. We have, I have some updated numbers, a 75% net promoter score. So again, that's that question, would you recommend this event to a family, friend, or colleague? 75 is best in industry, which is great to hear from our business community. And then our guests are at 57. They have some ideas to improve Restaurant Week that we'll take a look at and see if our restaurants are interested. Getaway Giveaway is happening today through Sunday. This is a way for us to encourage people to come downtown to shop either for their road trip or if they're going to just park it on the couch. So vacation, staycation shopping, we have 33 members involved. Tonight we're kicking it off at Bouchelle's with a Lounge and Lux party. So if you're into jazz and free gourmet snacks, 25% off cocktails. Have I sold anyone? That's tonight at 8:30. Lots of marketing, great support from our local media on this event. Thank you. And then we have a new event coming up in May and June called the Live After 5 Spring Entertainment Series. We have 24 actually, 24 applicants. They're all musicians who've applied. We'll have 2 locations. Right now it's J. Smith Walkway and Horizon Books, where we'll feature live music downtown. We are paying musicians and working on finalizing sponsorship around this. Toast to Downtown is on June 5th. We are flipping it on its head. It's all fun and games is the theme. So there will be no sit-down dinner. There will be 6 o'clock from 6 to 9. 6 o'clock we'll have some nibbles and drinks and games and arts and crafts. We have a number of partnering businesses with us this year who are helping us to provide all of this fun. At 7 o'clock, we'll have a slider and showdown or cocktail showdown with our DTCA members, showcasing some of their best eats and drinks. At 8:15, we'll do a presentation where we'll introduce the new board, say goodbye to the old. We'll have some award presentations, some prizes. All the games that you're playing throughout this event, you'll win raffle tickets where we'll hand out prizes at the end. There may or may not be, you know what, I'm not going to give that away. There are going to be some surprises. And then, of course, this is a fundraiser, so we'll have those on site as well. Again, working on sponsorships. Art Fair Series, we have Old Town and National Cherry Fest applications closed. So we have 104 applications for Old Town and 227 for National Cherry Fest. Those are all over the number needed, so we will be doing some cuts this year. The Downtown Art Fair, as I mentioned last month, is moving to September to coincide with Mural Fest. We'll have our own community mural on site at Rotary Square. And then it's actually at the same time as Porch Fest on Sunday, so maybe we can tie into that in some way. But registration goes through April 30th. Any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions?
Sorry, really quick question about the Restaurant Week. Did you say that's still open for surveys?
Yes, through the end
Okay,
of the
because I was
month.
going to say, I'm looking on the Instagram here, and I don't see a post or anything in the link tree, so is there an easy way to find that survey for people?
It's always on our website.
Just on the website?
She has
Okay.
been posting in stories
Okay.
throughout the weeks since, well, it's only been 1 week, I guess. So I can ask her to add it to the link tree, but it's always on our website.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, so one thing I want to say, Sarah, I really appreciate sort of the metrics you present to us. I know this is not the first time you've done it in terms of responses and what people think, and it gives us an idea of, you know, are we spending our money correctly? And I'll actually call you, you're going to be a trailblazer for the DDA, I think, in our metrics.
Oh,
I appreciate
thanks,
that.
Ed.
Thank
That's
you.
very kind.
Metrics are good.
All right,
Great
thanks,
work.
everybody. We'll see you tonight.
Tonight.
So last on the agenda, we always have opportunity for public comment. Any members of the public wish to comment? Please state your name, address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Yes, hi, Richard Robbins. So I'll put on the resident hat. I live at 720 Center Place, and my resident hat says, I really appreciate the DDA board. I'm one of those supporters, so wanted to just thank you for all your efforts and your time. Now I'll put on the GTSSA board, hat. I am representing the Grand Traverse Safe Streets Alliance. It's a new alliance of 8 different not-for-profit organizations, including Tart Trails, Norte, Cherry Capital Cycling Club, Traverse City Track Club, League of Michigan Bicyclists, Disability Network of Northern Michigan, Climate Lobby, and Groundwork. And so I wanted to share with you the fact that we have, our mission is to develop and help to implement safe, protected, dedicated non-motorized transportation corridors throughout through Traverse City and the surrounding townships and county, the 5-county region. So that's our mission, and that's a very tight mission, but that's what we stay focused on. We're looking forward to working with the DDA in the coming weeks, months, years, and we actually are going to be bringing resources to the table for you to be able to do visualizations of being able to accommodate non-motorized transportation in the downtown and Old Town areas so that we can start making strong and intelligent decisions about non-motorized use and expanding that, because frankly it is lacking, and we need to have safe transportation corridors even through downtown. So we're looking forward to working with you. We are not an adversarial group, we're a collaborative group, and we're going to bring resources, some of them pro bono, to be able to support the city planner from the city standpoint, but also the DDA, so that you can visualize some of the things that we possibly can do downtown in future plans. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comments or comments from the board? I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.